Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today, and I have got Kawasaki's 2021 ZX-10R. That's just the single R, not the double R, from Moto Hub. I am borrowing their demo bike for the day and had a bit of an opportunity to really just have a ride on this bike, which has had a number of updates. Now, obviously the most noticeable is going to be the styling. It's got the winglets built into that front fairing. It's got almost a H2 inspired front end on it with the recessed headlights. It's still got the central air intake there. Really, really cool look. I really like that. I do have a soft spot for the Kawasaki's, particularly in the KRT colors. I do have a Ninja 400 KRT, so that might explain that somewhat, but I think it goes back a bit further than that. So the styling on this is really cool. Obviously, it is a big 1000cc super bike, and the thing to keep in mind is they're not selling like they used to. Because of that, it feels to me like they're moving them a little bit more towards the track weapon, and they are still good road machines because they've got a heap of electronics to help keep you safe and keep things under control. But I feel like the movement on these big super bikes is back towards being track and race weapons, which is, you know, probably what most of the people looking for these are after. Now, the engine in this, obviously, an inline 4, it is a beautiful power plant. It has quite a direct throttle response. The power comes on. Once you hit about 4, it really starts to generate a bit of power, and then it just ramps up and up as the revs rise. So it is an aggressive power plant, which of course with a sports bike is probably what you want. Aggressive, really responsive. It's got a little bit less inertia in the engine, so it picks up more quickly, lets off the decel a little bit more quickly as well. You do have engine brake control, which is the engine braking control on this particular model, so that's something you can play around with. However, it's just a very aggressive power plant. The engine itself, along with the ergonomic of the bike, with the very sporty ergonomic, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail, really eggs you on to ride this bike aggressively. So it is a bike that you're probably not trundling around town, just, you know, going and picking up a coffee or a bottle of milk or something on. It's the type of bike which is going to really encourage you to be aggressive, to ride aggressively, to really get into it. And if that's what you're after, you're going to have a heap of fun on this particular bike. On the braking side of things, we've got these massive Brembo calipers on the front. Next to the shower forks, you've got fully adjustable shower forks with those external reservoirs in them. A really nice front end setup, I've got to say. It's one of those things I rarely fault the front. Great feel. It's got these Racetech tires on it, I think it is, which are a really sticky tire, which really allows you to properly appreciate the level of performance on offer here, and that's a really good thing, I've got to say. I certainly wouldn't be complaining about those tires. The brakes, it was a little bit of an unusual experience for me. The initial bite of the brakes is relatively gentle. It's almost like it's got a progressive brake action on it. A little bit deeper in, the brakes come on a lot more strongly, and you get an enormous amount of bite and power at that point. But that initial take up of the brakes is quite gentle, which is good for your general riding. It's also good for when you're kind of trailing off the brakes. It makes it a much easier transition off the brakes when you're doing that if you're out at that point. However, there's an enormous amount of power in the brakes. And when I was riding around town, I was thinking to myself, you know, it's not nearly the power I thought, but once I got out into the nice roads, or I was probably braking into the corners and stuff like that, they really came to life. There's also good power in the rear brake as well, enough for stopping around town from low speeds if you're not carrying too much momentum, and certainly for steadying the brake. And I was using both of those brakes quite actively into the corners and was really happy with that. The suspension, shower on the front, shower on the rear, a horizontal rear shock. I will say the rear was a little bit harsh for me. Coming from the Z, which I tested last week, which had a beautiful, sporty but supple suspension system on it, and probably one of the nicest stock suspension systems where I may have just got lucky, it was set up perfectly for me. However, the rear on that, I could feel the imperfections in the road, but it just swallowed them up. This is a sports bike. The suspension is sportier. It is a little bit firmer, and particularly on the rear, I did feel that, and it did mean that it wasn't quite as comfortable a ride. But I have not adjusted that at all, and I would say if this was my bike, I probably wouldn't be going for comfort on the rear shock of a super bike, because it's not what they're designed for. As far as tracking through the corners and the overall handling, this thing is an absolute scalpel. It's got that beautiful on rails feel that the Z has. It's just a much faster handler. And you know, I really love that Z, but on this, obviously you're much more aggressive on the bike, and as I said with the engine, it really wants you to ride hard, and that is certainly true with the ergonomics as well. You're right in there, and you know, you take it through the corners, and you do need to carry more speed to get that real feeling of speed. However, it is very, very rewarding. And certainly the bike felt absolutely glued to the road, and it would just give you such an opportunity to push harder, which is probably a good thing, but could also get you in a lot of trouble if you don't know your limits or the bike's limits, and it's most likely going to be your limits because this is an exceptional machine. I'm just going to jump on and give you a look at the ergonomics. So as you will probably notice here, I'm obviously in a very sporty position on this bike. I'm quite committed. I've got, you know, I'm not going to say I've got weight on my wrists because that's not really true. I'm carrying the weight through my core, and as long as you're fit enough to do that, I don't think you're going to find it overly aggressive. However, as your fitness fades during the day, you'll probably then end up on your wrists, and not a criticism of the bike, it's just a sporty machine. You'll notice a very, very tight reach between the seat and the pegs. You've got your feet folded right up. You're taking your weight through them. It does give you a great grasp onto the tank itself, which again helps with that engagement on the bike. But for me, I'm 180 centimeters, 32-inch inseam. I find the bike a good fit, a little bit maybe wide across the tank, but certainly not a problem, just a point of note. But I'm not sure how a much larger rider would feel on this bike. There is a fair bit of extra room here, and it is ideal for me, but it's a very, very sporty machine as far as the air goes. And I will say that seat height actually feels a little bit taller, and the seat feels a little bit wider than on the Z. So definitely something to keep in mind sitting on this bike. At a 32-inch inseam, I can get both feet down flat, but there's a little bit of extra room in it. But I'm really feeling the width of the bike and the width of the seat at the front between my legs there. So it's not as narrow as some machines. However, talking about the superbike or the super sport category, obviously it's not designed just for an easy reach to the ground or being, you know, overly thin between the legs. So I can't really criticize it there like I would if it was, say, a learner bike. So overall thoughts on Kawasaki's Ninja ZX-10R, the 2021 edition. Love the TFT display. Toggling through those ride modes is relatively easy. I like the accessibility of the different things on the dash. You then can actually go through and go into the more in-depth computer side of things and electronic side of things, which I haven't bothered because I just don't have the time today. But you do have a lot more room to adjust the bike to suit what you need. My favorite probably change this year is the styling on the front. I love the recessed headlights. I love the built-in winglets, both on the front and on the rear. It's got the big air intake in the middle there. Someone actually did point out that these look a little bit like a koala bear, and I'll see if I can put a photo up on the screen, but there's actually a little bit of truth to that. But overall, I think the styling of the bike is really, really on point. It's got quite an aggressively angled screen, which gives good wind protection. Mirrors, they're quite a hefty piece of kit. They've got a lot of adjustability though, and they've got the indicators in them, which I like to see because it makes them very, very visible. Good brakes. They've got a bit of an unusual kind of characteristic to them, as I said, with kind of a gentle initial bite and then a lot more bite and power further in, but really good modulation, so certainly nothing I can complain about, and good power from the rear. The suspension on the front, can't complain at all. I haven't touched any of the clickers on either end. The front was absolutely sorted. The rear, a little bit harsh for me, but I think that's just the fact it's a sports bike and probably something I shouldn't be complaining about, but it's something that I will note. And it certainly never affected the handling of the bike. but it did affect my comfort a little bit, and the seat was a little bit hard as well, which probably came into play there. Absolutely amazing handling overall, fast, sharp, like it's on rails, a beautiful aggressive engine, which is probably too much in my opinion for the road, but for a sufficiently skilled or aggressive rider, they're probably going to just love that engine. Too much for me, but I can certainly appreciate it even only using a small portion of the performance on offer there, and there's just so much more for the bike to give, and particularly if you were to take that to the track or have, you know, some better riding opportunities, it's going to be an absolute gem. Really, really beautiful, really aggressive overall machine, which is just going to encourage you to really be out there getting a knee down. Whether that's what you want or not, that's totally up to you. 28,000 on the road here in Sydney for about my postcode. So they are on the expensive side of things, but you're getting a lot of bike for that money, and it's a very, very cool machine. If you're after a sports bike, they are falling in popularity, which is why I think they're becoming a little bit more hard-nosed, a little bit more track-centric, and that's probably a good thing, realistically speaking, for the people liking these bikes. Anyway, as I said, this is the Moto Hub Test ZX-10R, the demo bike. If you'd like to test it out and you're in Sydney, the address will be up on the screen. Give them a call and see if you can line it up for a test ride. Really, really cool machine. Definitely one for the more aggressive riders who are after, you know, a lot more performance and a really top spec system. And if you think that's too much for you, check out the ZH2. I've got a video up of that as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. As always, stay safe out there, and I'll be back soon.